40. Gryph felt helpless as the abyssal terror rushed towards the ranks of elves. The demon had transformed due to Wick's upgrades, its newfound strength on horrific display as it rammed into the first rank of defenders. Screams of pain and terror carried over the water, thrumming into Gryph's heart and tearing at his soul. Arrows imbued with streaks of mystical energy lanced upwards, punching into the demon's mystical shield with concussive waves of force. While the shield endured the attack, several of the arrows got past the demon's defenses. Avarnerius's rage-filled roars drowned out the clang of steel and the screams of dying men, and Gryph knew the elves had done the demon some damage. He turned to Wick. "How is Avarnerius still here? You died." The gnome shrugged, and Gryph glared. With a deep sigh, Wick tried to explain. "I can't be sure, but Thonic summons are essentially complicated contracts between two sentient beings. My guess is that once old Flamin' Hornyhead got brainwashed by the Black Fog, it negated his ability to abide by the terms of the contract. He no longer has free will, so he cannot fulfill his side of the contract, and maybe until he does, he's stuck in the mortal realm. Mind you, I've never heard of anything like this, so that's only a guess." Wick looked terrified at the concept. "Whatever the Black Fog is, it must be incredibly powerful to interfere with the power of a Thonic bond." Could Mirthandir use the fog to invade the Thonic realm? "Without knowing how Thonic beings work, I cannot say," Grimlir said. "That is literally the worst thing that could ever happen. Ever," Wick said. "The Abyss is a world of barely contained malevolence. It would have consumed all the other realms long ago if the Thonic lords had ever stopped fighting each other and created a unified front. One mind with complete control of the Abyss is something too terrible to consider." Wick's purple skin grew paler. "Way to make a dude feel more awful. Thanks for that." "We need to get down there, now." Wick looked down to most of the war-born army, still standing in organized ranks on the beach. There was plenty of space for Gryph and the gang to reach the bridge ahead of them, but then they'd be stuck between two sets of enemies. And do what exactly? Gryph watched as Avarnerius tore into the elvish lines, wrecking bodies and trampling men. "Can you regain control of him?" "I barely have control of him on the best of days, but now? No way in hell."
"Zeg can control giant flame-brain demon, no problem."
"Oh, quit lying, you little bastard," Wick said.
"Zeg no lie. Well, not now time. Other stuff."
The imp's voice faded to a mumble. "You sure?" Gryph said, and stared at the imp. "You cannot possibly trust him," Wick sputtered.
"Yeah, no trust Zeg most times, but trust this time. Promise him good for trustiness. This time." "I say trust, little red man. I like little red man,"
Eret said. Zeg grinned, exposing a wide mouth full of far too many teeth, and Eret grinned back. "You don't get a vote," Wick grumbled. Eret's face fell, and he looked to Gryph, who held out a hand to stall any further complaints. He looked down at Wick, and the gnome shrugged. "Guess we have nothing to lose, except our lives, and mine is measured in hours, so what the hell?" Gryph gripped his small friend by the shoulder. "Let's make those hours count." Wick looked at Grimlir, clad in his automaton-like armor. "On the slight chance we live through the next 10 minutes, can this crucible thing of yours prevent me from dying?"
"I cannot say for certain,
The Crucible captures the souls of fallen warriors who've pledged to serve the Alliance even after death." He gave a sideways glance at Eret, and for the first time, Gryph wondered who the massive warborn had been in his last life. "Given time, I may be able to alter the parameters to bind your soul to your body."
"Well, that sounds promising,"
Wick said, a small smile crossing his lips. "It could also fail and trap your soul in a formless limbo between the realms." The gnome scowled at the Thalmir, and then looked up at Gryph.
"So, since I'm the one most sure to die today, I want first crack at kicking Mirthandir in the nut bag."
"You're obsessed with violence against testicles. You know that," Gryph said with a grin. Wick feigned punching said nuts.
"I like to turn my weaknesses into strengths. I could also headbutt them."
"Zeg tired of slack-jawed goobers blabbing dumb nonsense."
His hands swirled with chthonic fire, and he jumped onto Wick's head. For a moment, the gnome complained, but then the imp grabbed his head in both hands and poured flames into it. Gryph freaked out, but realized Wick was laughing and gave his purple-skinned friend an odd smile. A moment later, the flames stopped. "You okay?" Gryph asked.
"Yeah, it tickles,"
Wick said, giggling. "Why the hell did he do that?"
"I've gone through a few changes since we last talked."
Gryph looked his purple-scaled friend up and down. "You think?"
"Zeg, go now."
With that, the imp disappeared in a puff of sulfuric smoke. "Well, okay then," Gryph said, and saw a tiny puff of crimson fire explode above Avernerius's head. Zeg grabbed the abyssal terror by the horns, and for the merest of moments, the giant demon stopped its forward momentum and shook as if racked by a massive seizure. Zeg held on to the beast's horns, and Gryph could not help but think it was the strangest rodeo he'd ever seen. The spasms stopped, and a silence hung over the lake. It lasted mere moments before the demon roared and swung its sword through the ranks of the warborn, sweeping them aside like a farmer scything wheat. Wick's mouth hung open.
"I cannot believe that worked."
Gryph toggled open his adventure party window and added Wick, Eret, and Zeg to the party. He tried to extend the party to Ovram and then Tifila, but received the same error message both times.
"You have failed to add a member to your adventure party. Beings under the mental control of another cannot be added to an adventure party."
Damn it. On a whim, he tried adding Avernerius.
"You have failed to add a member to your adventure party. Beings under the sway of chthonic fealty cannot be added to an adventure party."
Gryph had no time to contemplate what chthonic fealty was, as he extended the invitation to Grimlir, and his perk telepathic bond connected his mind to those of the adventure party. Gryph recoiled a bit at the alien feel of the imp's brain, but regained his composure. Evidently, the snarky imp was willing to let Gryph lead. For now. Gryph ran towards the bridge, but then realized that every step he took resulted in the rest of the warborn army taking a step as well. He skidded to a halt, and Wick ran into him. The army stopped as well. "They'll reach the bridge before we do, and cut us off."
"So what do we do?"
"Zeg, can you port us onto the bridge?"
"Only take 3, can Zeg. Big clank have too big metal. No can port."
"I can get there on me own," Grimlir said, and leapt into the air. Jets of flame pushed the metal-clad dwarf into a high arc that would land him at the edge of Mirthandir's forces.
Gryph, not sure that's—"
Wick began, but then the stench of sulfur announced the imp was back. He placed one hand on Gryph, the other on Eret, and then smacked Wick in the face with his tail before wrapping it around the gnome's neck.
"Hey!"
The world bent, and for the briefest of moments, Gryph not only saw, but felt the chthonic realm. Sweat poured from him as a roasting wave of hot air roiled over his skin. The stench followed, sulfur mixed with methane and something worse that Gryph could not identify. A fierce itching, like the bites of 1,000 fire ants, crawled over his skin. He opened his mouth to scream, and then the world folded again, and they were all standing on the bridge. Gryph fell to his knees and fought the queasiness threatening to empty his stomach.
"That was invigorating,"
Wick said with a grin. Eret just stood, no sign of any distress on his face. He reached down to help Gryph to his feet, and then looked to Zeg.
Can we do that again sometime?
Zeg grinned at the large warborn. Grimlir landed with a clang of metal on stone a few feet away from them.
Hurry, ugly dumbheads. Many more handsome baldies come for you.
Gryph spun to see the warborn on the beach sprinting towards them. They would be overtaken in minutes. "We can't stay here." He turned back towards Sylvan Honor as streams of black fog surged skyward and pummeled into the Rangers. "We need to move. Now!" Gryph looked down the length of the causeway and saw Mirthandir standing rigid amidst the chaos, staring straight at Gryph. Ovrim, Tifla, and Berendiel all stood behind the one-time Prince Regent, calm and mindless slaves amidst the terror of battle. The aberrant traitor locked eyes with Gryph, a horribly placid grin on his face, and then turned his back to him, fist raised high. The warborn carrying the adamantine cube marched, but Tifla and Ovrim stayed behind, staring straight at Gryph and his fellows.
"Tiff!"
Wick said in a desperate tone. Gryph placed a hand on his friend's shoulder, and the small man looked up at him, tears brimming in his eyes.
"Promise me we won't hurt her."
"Even if it means my life," Gryph said.
Zeg help save pretty lady too. Push blue-haired midget or tall pointy head if must to save. But save will.
Tanks? Wick said with a grimace. A war cry flowed over the lake and drew their gaze. The elves were roaring defiance and smashing swords against breastplates. Arrows and spells launched into the warborn, killing several of the cube bearers. As they fell, more replaced them, and the cube continued its inexorable journey towards the far shore. Swirls of black fog zipped in and out of the box, corrupting more rangers, paladins, and casters. Those taken by the weapon turned on their comrades, killing them without emotion or regret. The free rangers pulled back under the command of Gartheniel, the half-elf steward. They did their best to slow the advance of their brothers-turned-foes without killing them. Gryph watched as Mirthandir strode forward with confident ease, his ever-growing army of enslaved soldiers parting to let him pass like the Red Sea before Moses. Each step the traitorous elf lord took put more combatants between him and them. Mirthandir stopped and looked up. Gryph followed the angle of his gaze to the spire, the dead Empyrean tree that had once illuminated the valley, bringing peace and ease to all its residents. His mind flew back to a conversation he'd had with Berendiel, the first time he'd laid eyes on the tree the Eladrin had called Arvendiel. "Some can no longer say her name," the ranger captain had told him, referring to her simply as the Spire. "Others believe that someday she will be rejuvenated, and that day will mark a new epoch in the history of the realms." "But you do not believe that?" Gryph had asked. "I am a realist," Berendiel had replied. "Losing Arvendiel was a terrible blow to our people. Without her light, the Eladrin devolved into the various elven races that populate the rest of Corin. We who live under her shadow still cling to who we once were, but soon we too will no longer be Eladrin." Bile rose in Gryph's throat, and he knew that he was missing something. Control of Sylvan Anor was only a step to Mirthandir's goal, not the goal itself. Which means there was something he wanted more than an army of warborn and elves. What if Mirthandir was not a realist? What if he had discovered a way to bring the tree Arvendiel back to life? The influence his aberrant mind could have on the once mighty tree and the epoch it would bring to the realms was too terrible to consider. Gryph's eyes snapped from Mirthandir to his army, and then back to his own pathetic force. He hated to kill people who were not responsible for their actions, but he knew casualties were inevitable. He turned to the imp resting on Eret's shoulder. "Zeg, can Avernarius clear a path for us?" The imp grinned again and disappeared in another flash of crimson flames. A second later, he was back atop Avernarius, steering the demon via its horns like some insane puppet master. The abyssal terror roared and swung its magma blade back and forth in slow, deadly arcs. Warborn fell, burnt and screaming. The demon lumbered forward as dozens of arbalest bolts flew at him. This time, the demon did not, or could not, raise its magical shield, and most the bolts found their mark. Most ricocheted off the magma plates that protruded from the demon's skin, but some found the small gaps between the plates. The demon didn't pay them any heed as Zeg turned it towards the arbalest wielders. The massive hellbeast moved like a cat hacking up a hairball. But then a stream of magma flew from its mouth, dousing the closest group in molten rock. Those who were lucky instantly turned to spots of oily soot, while the unlucky had limbs melted away, living long enough for their screams to flow over the deep water. Gryph ran, and the others followed. Soon they were behind the demon, wary of its cloven hooves. "We need to get to Mirthandir," Gryph thought at the others, and sidestepped a claymore blow from one of the warborn. Gryph activated counterattack and impale, and his spear bit into the warborn's side, slicing between the plates of thick armor. The massive man grunted and swung again. Gryph used dodge and ducked under the clumsy blow, spinning his spear and jamming it into the creature's neck. He activated Analyze. Warborn, level 15, H 280, S 320, M 180, SP 180. Warborn are the epitome of Thalmir artifice. These bipedal automatons are unlike any other creation built by the ancient high dwarves, as they possess souls, authored in tribute by the fallen warriors of the Alliance. While they are incredibly tough warriors, they are naive and raw, unformed as individuals and as a people. They will obey the commands of whoever wears the Iron Crown. Strengths unknown. Immunities unknown. Weaknesses unknown. Unformed as individuals and a people? Gryph looked back at Edit, who nodded, his face full of grim regret. We will help them if we can, Edit. I promise, Gryph sent. And I will dedicate my life to it, Grimlair added, even as he sliced a warborn's arm off with his reciprocating blade. Wick was keeping a mesmerized ranger at bay with thonic bolts, while Edit turned his axe against another of his brothers. They were holding their own, but a quick glance back towards Dar Thorim showed Gryph the warborn reinforcements would soon overtake them. We need to get off this bridge. You're the asshole who wanted to get on it, Wick thought. Zeg, port us to the other side.
No do. Too far. End up in middle of handsome bodies and pointy heads. They stab, murder, kill you. Maybe Zeg will port.
No, Gryph yelled through the link. Wick grumbled. Why didn't you tell us that before? Wick cut off any response. Yeah, we no did ask. I get it. Wick dodged a sword swipe from the ranger and speared the man through the eye with a thonic bolt. A pulse of regret flowed through their bond, and they all felt the loss of the elf's life. His eyes widened as he saw the reinforcements getting close. We need a new plan here. Avernerius swung his blade through a group of warborn and elves who'd come in too close, buying them a moment's respite. The abyssal terror looked down upon Wick, and Zeg peeked his grinning face over the beast's horns.
Breathe fire, dum-dum. Why for think Zeg give fire? Burn bridge.
Gryph had no time to wonder what the hell the imp was blathering about, but Wick's mental laugh pushed through the bond, and Wick turned towards the approaching horde of warborn. The gnome opened his mouth, and crimson flame erupted in gouts. The flame slapped across the surface of the bridge, and stone melted. Gryph did not know how hot flame had to be to melt solid rock, but the air was as hot as a blast furnace. The bridge bubbled, and globs of molten stone flowed along the edges of the bridge and into the deep water. The lake roiled and sizzled, and steam rose, clouding the warborn's approach like morning fog on the Thames. Wick's flame seared through the span, and he closed his mouth, cutting off the flame. A loud burp, accompanied by puffs of smoke, rumbled forth, and Wick slapped his chest a few times like a man easing habanero-induced gastrointestinal stress. Back up, boys, Wick sent through the link. They backed up, while Avernerius continued to swing his sword, keeping the enemies off their back. Wick opened his mouth again, and more of the flame belched forth. Half a minute later, the span snapped and fell into the deep water, the white-hot edges casting a cloud of steam about them. A thunderous roar of pain rose, ruining their moment of victory, and Gryph spun to see dozens of arbalest bolts, arrows, and spells punch into Avernerius. The demon stumbled and lurched forward, tossing Zeg from his horny perch and dumping him into the midst of the enemy forces. Zeg! Wick screamed through the link, chased by a flash of embarrassment. Before anyone could react to the emotional outburst, Zeg ported back onto Edit's shoulder.
No worry, purple goober. Zeg okay. Nice no love Zeg, though.
I don't, came Wick's embarrassed response. But then Avernerius fell onto his face, pin-cushioned by dozens of fletched shafts and dotted with a dozen smoking craters. His body slammed onto the bridge, crushing several enemies who'd stayed too close.
Bye-bye, puny demon,
Zeg thought, and then Avernerius's body disappeared in a flash of thonic flame. You really need to learn the meanings of words, imp, Wick thought,
No call Zeg imp. Zeg way more than imp.
What is imp? Eret asked. Can we focus, people? We have an army bearing down on us, and we lost our tank. Gryph thought and dual-cast Water Blast. He aimed the combined jets of water at the approaching enemy, tossing several from the bridge and dousing the entire span. He continued to blast Warborn and elves into deep water, buying as much space between the enemies and his people as he could. The jet ended as suddenly as it had begun, and Gryph raised his spear above his head and waited. The Warborn were first to their feet, and they marched with calm purpose towards them once more. As they got closer, the tip of Gryph's spear flowed with sparks. He saw Wick glance at him nervously. Stand back, he thought, and waited, heart thundering at the emotionless wave of death that moved at him. Now would be a good time. Not yet. The Warborn lowered their spears and continued their advance. Wick backed away. How about now? Wait for it. The closest Warborn pushed his spear forward, and Gryph activated dodge, and then punched the butt of his spear onto the bridge. Yriel's maelstrom discharged, and a bolt of chain lightning blasted from the spear and tore a ragged hole through the chest of a Warborn so close that Gryph could smell the charring flesh as he died. Tendrils of electricity twined about the dead man's legs, conducted by the water Gryph had blasted at him, and he fell, spasming as the last discharges pulsed through him. Despite the Warborn's innate 50% resistance to all magical damage, his initial strike had still killed the bipedal automaton. Was it the proximity? A dozen more bolts exploded from the tip of Gryph's spear and thrummed into every Warborn within 20 feet. None of the others were killed, but they still took a whopping 234 points of damage. Several collapsed to their knees, stunned, and it pushed another 20 off the bridge and into the lake. That worked well. Let's do it again, Wick sent. Can't. It has an hour cooldown period, and I used the last of my charges. It'll take a day to recharge enough to use that attack again. Well, we're up Dung Brook without an oar. Gryph gave the gnome a sideways glance, but realized questioning the odd similarity of cultural colloquialisms separated by literal universes was not the best use of his time in the current situation. Gryph, Wick, Eret, Grimlir, and Zeg each killed several of the downed Warborn before they could recover, but beyond the area of effect of Gryph's attack, dozens more stood in a formation that would have made the Roman legions look sloppy. What are they waiting for? Wick sent. The formation parted like water, and two figures emerged from the ocean of Warborn. No, I can't do this, Wick blubbered through the mental link. Tifila and Ovrim stood at the front of the Warborn. Ovrim danced his way through a series of sword forms, while Tifila drew green life energy into her hands. A tense silence hung over the lake, broken only by Wick's whimper. Gryph put a steadying hand on his friend. Easy, Wick. Easy? What in the abyss are you talking about? I will not hurt her. Nor will I. That's going to kind of put a crimp on our abilities to live, don't you think? Why are my brothers not attacking? Eret asked. Jerk not elf want to make dumbhead suffer. He fit in real good in Bixritigal. Gryph knew Zeg was right. Mirthandir knew he could send 100 Warborn or Eladrin at them, and they would kill them. They would not want to, but they would. But there was no way any of them would harm Tifila or Ovrim. He wants to torment us. I still have dibs on that kick to the nutsack. They had no time to ponder on Mirthandir's strategy before their friends attacked them.
Ovrim came at Gryph, his blade a blur of glinting red light. Gryph activated parry and blocked the attack. The Zaidai pushed with his prodigious strength, and Gryph grunted with the effort, but recognized the adjudicator's position would soon result in Gryph being exactly where Ovrim wanted him. The Zaidai was already the superior fighter, and Gryph's unwillingness to do the man terminal damage further handicapped his options. He needed to change the rules of the contest, and quickly. Ovrim, perhaps sensing his thoughts, danced backwards, taunting him from afar. Gryph realized the distraction too late, and a half-dozen vines sprouted from the bridge and twined his legs, immobilizing him. His eyes flashed to Tifla, protected by a shimmering green field. Eret swung his axe back and forth, taking chunks of health from the magical barrier, but was careful not to hurt the diminutive life mistress. Zeg tried to port inside Tifla's sphere of energy, but kept getting bounced back, muttering under his breath in the chthonic tongue. Wick stood motionless, unable to bring any attack against his love.
"Wick,"
Gryph sent through the link.
"Do something!"
But Wick did not move.
Handsome bodies and pointy heads moving!
Gryph saw that the closest Warborn and Rangers were advancing on them.
"Shit!" "We have them,"
Grimlir said, nodding at Eret. The giant Warborn smiled, understanding his father's look.
Little red man, shield please.
Zeg ported onto the Warborn's shoulder, and a crimson sphere of energy flowed from his tiny hands, surrounding both imp and construct as a volley of fired arrows impacted. They were not imbued, and the shield held. The metal-clad father and his eunuch son ran towards the coming enemy. Grimlir took up a defensive position next to Eret, and rapid-fire arbalest bolts flew from his raised arms. They flew towards the approaching enemies, killing elf and warborn alike. Eret extended his hands forward, and the air shimmered like a mirage above a distant desert road. The bridge seemed to warp as the stone took on a rubber-like consistency. Eret moved his hands up and down like a maid shaking out a blanket before making a bed. The surface of the bridge buckled, and the enemies scattered like drops of water from a shaking dog. It knocked dozens off their feet and tossed them from the bridge.
"Nice job,"
Gryph sent as the duo rushed towards the enemy line. But then Tifla's vines contracted, pulling his attention away from the odd duo as they disappeared amidst a swarm of enemy combatants. Gryph grimaced in pain. Ovrim walked up to him and placed the point of his sword at Gryph's heart. The Zaidai's eyes were blank, and his expression seemed almost bored, but his sword arm was shaking. Gryph grabbed the Zaidai by the arm and cast Mind Shield, pushing the spell into Ovrim's mind.
"Fight it, Ovrim,"
Gryph whispered. The Zaidai's eye twitched, and his sword arm dipped an inch.
"Fight!"
Gryph cast Animate Rope and watched as the length of spider silk eased up and around the Zaidai. Gryph activated the rope's Compel ability.
"You are Ovrim Nightslayer, Adjudicator, and enemy of the Prime. Resist!"
Ovrim shook, and his mouth opened in a noiseless scream. Tears flowed from the corners of his eyes, and his sword arm dipped even further. The swirling black mites in the whites of his eyes faded, and Gryph saw a moment of recognition in the Zaidai's eyes.
"Gryph, kill me, please!"
His eyes swirled again as the black fog reasserted dominance.
"I will not, but I must end your threat."
Gryph cast Halo of Air around the Zaidai's head and then pushed mana into his bracers. The Zidai pushed his sword downward as Gryph unleashed the power of his bracers. Waves of magnetic force pulsed through Gryph's hands. They warped around the metal of Ovidum's armor, gripping, and then shoved the Zidai backwards and over the edge of the bridge. Wick still stood motionless, eyes stuck on his love. She ran at him, drawing life energy into her blades, but still he stood paralyzed.
Wick, move, damn it!
Finally, some sense returned to the gnome, and he summoned a pair of his own chthonic swords, just in time to block Tifla's attack. She swung several more times, fierce and calm, and he parried again and again, but refused to counterattack. Wick blocked another of her blows, but then one of her daggers disappeared, and she unleashed water blast at him. He gagged and choked and was knocked off his feet. Tifla redirected the stream, shooting Wick along the bridge like a cork in a champagne bottle.
Wick!
Gryph screamed and turned his hands palm forwards and unleashed a water blast of his own. Tifla's water blast ceased, and she raised a life shield. The water pulsed across the shield for half a minute before ebbing. Tifla marched towards him. Gryph activated his ring of air shield, and the vines along the right side of his body exploded outward. Tifla brought more green life energy to her hand, and more vines shot from those still twined around the left side of his body. They wrapped him up again and tightened. His arms twisted, forcing his open palms to point at his face. Tifla walked up to him. She moved her fist, and the vines pulled Gryph lower, matching her height. She stared into his face, and the swirling fog staining the whites of her eyes swirled and cleared, and she smiled at Gryph.
Tifla, are you okay?
Tifla's lips turned up into an unfamiliar smile, and then words that were not hers came in her voice.
Hello, Gryph. Mirthen, dear, let her go, you bastard!
The aberrant elf turned Tifla's hands back and forth, like a shopper examining an outfit in a dressing room mirror.
This feels odd. I can inhabit anyone the black fog has taken. It is quite a thrill.
She turned back to him, and Mirthendir spoke again.
Which makes me wonder something. How are you immune?
Too strong, I guess. Tifla's fist twisted again, and the vines gripped tighter, forcing the air from Gryph's lungs.
Tifla leaned closer. It isn't about strength. That isn't how the Prime work. They find what you want most, and they convince your brain they've given it to you. That's how they gain access. And though deep down, where your soul lives, you know it to be false, your mind does not, and your body does not listen to your soul.
Too bad, 'cause yours is destined for the void,
Gryph sputtered as he tried to breathe. Tifla's face twisted in anger, and Mirthendir brought her blade to Gryph's neck.
You should have fought by my side. This petty squabble is not the real war. Together we could have been strong. But you chose sentiment over life. I hope it doesn't bring us all low.
You do not fight for us, but for yourself. You are so corrupted you cannot see what you have lost.
Tifla's face contorted into a livid sneer.
I'm tired of this conversation,
Mirthendir said, and forced Tifla to pull the blade back.
Goodbye.
Gryph saw a blur of motion as the arm slammed forward. Gryph watched the blade pierce Wick's body before his mind processed that the gnome had jumped in front of him. But his soul knew it, and it screamed. Wick sputtered, and purple blood foamed around the corners of his mouth. "Tiff?" Mirthandir's surprised smile was a blemish on Tifla's face, and he commanded her to shove the blade of green energy further into Wick's body. Wick shook, his mouth agape in shock and pain, and then she pulled the blade free and he crumbled. He stared up at Tifla. "This is much better. You'll both get to watch him die," Mirthandir said. "I will kill you!" Gryph roared, using every ounce of strength to thrash at his bonds. They remained unmoving. "That will be fun. Come find me if you are able. I still have so much to show you," Mirthandir said, twisting Tifla's face into a capricious grin. Then the elf lord was gone, and the black fog turned the whites of her eyes black again. Tifla looked down on Wick, face placid as a mirror-calm lake, but inside, Gryph knew she was screaming. Wick reached a weak arm towards her, the pinky of his right hand extended. "Together, forever." The light left his eyes. His arm fell limply to his side, and he was gone. "No!" Gryph screamed, and he struggled against the vines holding him. The smallest of whimpers slipped past Tifla's lips, and Gryph saw a tear stream down her face.